Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have Mr. Jan Bosch. How are you, Jan?
I'm doing fabulously well. Thank you for asking, Andrew.
Fabulously well.
Excited to be here.
Well, no, thank you for coming on the show. It's as we talked about the other day. I was actually in Copenhagen, of all places,
Oh my gosh.
when you came on stage. To kind of like dry ice, disco balls. Yeah.
Okay. That's why this is called the Gin and Tonic podcast, right? I suppose.
Yeah, it's not the disco. This is not disco. The disco show. No. You came and did a keynote presentation about when you were at Code, the continuous
Yes.
delivery conference.
Yes. Exactly.
Run by Pragma originally. Yeah. So that's what I remember crossing paths before many years. I think it's 2019 actually. It's 5 years ago. That's scary.
When we were all still young and innocent.
Well, some of us still innocent, obviously. You speak for yourself. I'm still innocent.
Okay. You want to deep dive on that one, Andrew, or shall we?
Hey, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. You end up asking me questions. You see, during the show, that's what it's supposed to be about.
That's how we do it.
So, for all those people that don't know Jan Bosch, I mean, I suppose firstly, where are you joining us from today? Whereabouts are you hanging out these days?
Yeah, I live in Gothenburg these days in Sweden. And that is after, I think, 5 countries in the last 20 years or so. But for the last decade or so, I'm now, quote unquote, stuck in Sweden, which is an amazing country to live, and I love being here. But before this, and I'm now a professor of software engineering at Chalmers University of Technology. I am director for something called Software Center that we can talk about a little bit, a collaboration between 16 international companies and 5 universities around accelerating digitalization.
Oh, cool.
I do some angel investing, I do some board work, I do some consulting, but that's actually my main job these days. Before this, I lived in Silicon Valley, worked for a company called Intuit, that many people from that side of the Atlantic know well because of
you make accountants look good. Exactly.
It was an amazing company to work for.
CFOs love you. #CFOs love Intuit. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I really enjoyed working there. So it was a great place to be. Before that, I lived in Finland, worked for Nokia, ran one of the research labs at Nokia Research Center. And before that, I was a young and innocent professor of software engineering in Sweden and in the Netherlands. This is the second time I live in Sweden. I spent some time in Canada too, briefly. And according to my PhD students, I'm now an old, grumpy, and cynical professor of software engineering. So that's who I am in a nutshell.
Old, cynical, and grumpy. Okay. They were dishing out the compliments on that day, were they?
They were not, but after I had harassed them on their articles, that's what you get in return, I guess.
Yeah, so, if you're saying stuff like that to your professor, you're gonna get a downgrade, are you?
Yes.
That's a dangerous ploy strategy. That is.
Exactly. No.
So you said that you started, because I know we talked about this the other week actually, because I hadn't put 2 and 2 together. Like look at Jan Bosch. He's not really a Dutch name. So it's not really a Swedish name. It's a Dutch name. Yeah. So you originally were from Holland, yeah, from Netherlands.
I'm originally from the Netherlands. I mean, my name could have been German or many other countries as well, but I happen to be from the Netherlands originally. But I left in '94. Was back for, which is now 30 years ago. I was back for a few years, and but I've been basically for the last 30 years, except for a short period between 2000 and 2004. I've been living outside of the Netherlands, so that's me.
And what was it, Amsterdam you were in, or was it somewhere else?
No, I was born in the eastern part of the Netherlands, and we mostly lived in the northern and eastern part of the Netherlands. So I studied in Enschede, where my youngest is currently studying, and I was a professor in Groningen, if you want to have some Dutch sounds in your podcast, which is the very northeastern part of the Netherlands. A really fun city. So that was good.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah. I think we touched on this the other day. Is the kind of area around Eindhoven, yeah, and the high tech campus with ASML and NXP and all those that kind of square mile there. It's incredible. It's an incredible place.
Yes.
And I think it's like the most concentrated part of IP for tech or innovation in the whole of EMEA or something. Is that right? It's something ridiculous like that as a start.
It's a really good place. And I forgot to mention, I have a 10% appointment at the Technical University Eindhoven. And I'm in frequent contact with several of the companies in the area, ranging from Thermo Fisher, electron microscopes, ASML, you already mentioned. Van der Lande is a company building warehouses and solutions for warehouses. I mean, there are lots of really exciting companies there, including startups, by the way. There's a very active startup community there as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's quite interesting, and it's also what I found incredible when you look at the ASML, because some people I know that work there, they actually make the machines that make the chips, don't they? They're like ground zero.
Yes.
Of like the innovation cycle. Because if ASML didn't exist, then all these chip manufacturers wouldn't have any machines to actually create the chips. I mean, it's just when you look at the value chain, it's incredible what they've done.
Yeah. No, and especially the ability, the nanometers that ASML is able to manufacture chipsets is, I think they're the only company in the world that can currently do that to the best of my understanding. So they're quite an amazing company, and one of the Dutch innovations that as a Dutch person I'm proud of.
No, exactly. Well, that, and obviously orange beer. When I was in the World, I was out at the World Cup, watching the World Cup when I was in Amsterdam, and everything was painted orange, including the beer was orange as well. So it's kind of No, it was. We were drinking orange beer in the Amsterdam.
I've had not a problem, but let's not go there right now. Maybe that's a little dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, in terms of so when I looked on your website, janbosch.com, it's interesting how you sequence your headline, because you say innovator, then you say executive, and then you say professor. So you actually, I thought it was a very interesting sequencing that.
Yeah.
Is there a reason behind that you did that?
Yeah, and and now we're getting serious after all the joking in the introduction. It took me a long time to figure out what gets me out of bed in the morning, Andrew.
Right, okay.
And what I realize is that what I believe is that almost all progress that we've made as a human species over the last centuries has been driven by new technology introduced into society.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge that I have with current research is that the metrics and KPIs, and I'm playing the game just like anyone else, is all about published papers. The more papers you can crank out, the more cited you can get, the more successful you're viewed as an academic. But the problem
so what you said, it's a numbers game.
It's very much a numbers game. And the problem is that when you publish a paper, humankind has very little benefit from it until the new knowledge that is actually being created is being translated into products, into solutions, into offerings that help human beings. And to be honest, almost all new technology is introduced into society through companies.
Yes.
So rather than me wanting to focus my time on writing more papers, I still do that with my PhD students. What I try to do in Software Center and in the other activities that I'm involved in is I'm trying to accelerate the adoption of new technologies in these companies so that it makes it out into the world, so that we start to reap the benefits of that technology. And I mean, your podcast is called Growth and Technology. And I believe that almost all growth that we've seen as a species is driven by technology. Yes, we can use technology for bad purpose too, but by and large, technology is at the basis of almost all human progress that we've made over the last centuries, I believe. So if you ask me, why do I care more about innovator than professor, if you want, is because I believe that does not deliver on its potential unless it is actually introduced into society and used in society.
So it's like made
a book or a paper or something like that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, so what you said, it's like unless you make it real, it becomes like it's this theory. It's just a concept.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a hypothesis.
And the biggest problem, if you ask me, is, I mean, I think I saw a metric recently that last year something like 7 million research articles were published across all the different fields. There's no way that anyone in industry is able to stay on top of that. So our problem is, our limitation is not more papers. Our limitation is the innovation absorptive capacity of industry and society. We're simply not able to adopt the new knowledge.
But is it a question on that though? Do you think there's a psychological or a physical moat between academia and business? Is that bridge effective, or is that part of the problem? You know, it's like, is it like a separate castle? You know.
Yeah. So I mean, I can tell you what I did. I mean, normally, and sorry, I don't know how deep you want to go into the academic system, but typically you have academia, you have industry, and then you have governments providing research funding. Now, in my experience, that often leads to a very complicated ménage à trois, where the academic will cozy up very closely to
Ménage à trois or threesome, you could say. No, sorry, that's very politically incorrect.
We're not going to go and deep dive on technicalities of this thing, because then we will never end up anywhere. But the problem is, what you very often see, I was on the industry side responsible for university collaborations. Academics are very close to the companies as they're writing the proposal. Proposal goes to a government institution. The government institution decides to give you money. And the moment that happens, the academics typically have a tendency to say, yeah, no, now we have to do research. That takes time. You have to give us a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And don't call us, we'll call you. So the cycle time of academia tends to be much slower than what industry wants to accomplish.
Right.
So the center that I run, we run 6-month sprints. And that's too long from an agile software development perspective.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's quite a big sprint.
6 months, your research project can get killed by a group of companies that decides that they no longer want to fund you. So first of all, I do not have public money. Second of all, it is the companies that decide if projects get to live or not. And that leads to a situation that the academics behave and operate in a different fashion than what they would do in their traditional sense, right? So that's what I'm trying to do, to quote unquote fix what I think is a bit of a weakness in the current industry academia collaboration patterns.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, I didn't know that detail about. Obviously, I knew about the tripartite piece, and but I didn't realize that was the behavior. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the academics more accountable and more timely, because otherwise, you know, the whole market may have moved on, the whole opportunity may have moved on, the whole commercialization may have moved on. You know, if you're waiting for like 4 years, I mean, that's a hell of a long time in some of these, you know, S curves and cycles that go on.
And just to be clear, it's not just academics that have too long cycle times. Many of the embedded system companies have too long cycle times as well. And this brings me to what I think is one of the biggest capabilities that companies need to have these days, which is business agility, right? When something happens in the market, you want to have business agility, which means that your R&D has to tag along and be able to respond fast enough to the market changes that you need to respond to. And if you go to a typical automotive company, typically they deliver value through platform generations, and it takes 5 years typically to develop a new platform. So I mean, then you don't have the business agility that you need as an organization.
Yeah, I mean that links to the you know, your 2024 predictions. You know, number 2, resistance to agile. Yeah. Which, you know, I mean, I the first agile project I ran, I'm a qualified Scrum Master, whatever that means.
Good for you.
And
proud of you.
But I've actually done it in anger. I've obviously run agile projects in big companies, and I actually ran a project in a life sciences company who remained nameless, and they were waterfall. Yeah, and we did this kind of like, you know, daily stand-ups, how we change the world today, and all that kind of stuff. And they were like incredible. They were like, "Wow, this is very quick." It's just like, yeah, we're going to get it done this week, you know, like this week and next week, you know, not like 1 year away. So it's incredible when you think about it. But, you know, and also that manifesto is 20 odd years old now, isn't it? So it's just, But some people are still catching up.
Yeah, so some industries are still catching up. Other industries, if you go to the pure software as a service industry, so the online of this world, companies of this world, there you start to see that there is a bit of people are starting to see the weaknesses of Agile as well. They still want the fast feedback cycles, but not everything can be in the fast feedback cycle. They still
Yes.
want R&D. Agile is maybe happening within teams, but not in the organization as a whole. So those are the kinds of weaknesses that we're starting to see. And that's why I predicted that resistance to Agile will reach a tipping point. But it doesn't mean that we should go back to waterfall. It should mean that we have to fall forward and find the next paradigm in which to operate. And what that paradigm looks like, I'm not quite sure yet. That's one of the things that I'm actually quite interested in. And if people that are listening or watching this have ideas, I'd happily hear from them about it. But I have a few ideas. I mean, we still want to keep the fast feedback loops, but I think we need a higher level of integration between software R&D, other forms of R&D, the rest of the business, the ecosystem. And there are a few other things. I mean, the role of AI is, of course, going to play a big role in this context as well. So we're at the cusp of a change, and what it will look like, I don't know yet, but I do know that it is coming.
I mean, I suppose. To build on that, I mean, there's obviously a lot going on. And last year, obviously, there's this kind of Gen AI tsunami that seemed to hit the whole organization or the whole world, you could say. Mm-hmm. What I sense is that now this is kind of going, it's actually people have got to actually put it, work out the use cases, are actually get it into production, make it real, because it's gone through that hype cycle. Yeah. It's like at the top. It's before the trough of disillusionment, I think they call it, by a certain analyst firm. Because there's been obviously lots of things buzzing around, but how do you make it? It's back to how do you make it real? Yeah, bit like you said about your the kind of research papers.
Yes.
And it's been fascinating to watch it, but it seems to be calming down a little bit now, and bottoming out and getting a bit more practical. So I was with a very large bank the other week, and one of like top tier global bank, and they were saying that they were kind of, even the CEO was sponsoring stuff around, the group CEO was sponsoring stuff around what they were doing, and so it's got real visibility about how they can transform the bank. They apparently they did like a brainstorming workshop, and they created like hundreds and hundreds of use cases, but then they curated it down to like the top most impactful ones, and now they're literally putting them into production now this year. So it just shows how, back to your agile piece, banks are not usually that agile, but obviously they're, it sounds like some of them are actually seizing that opportunity, which is good to see.
Yeah.
So
it's really good to see. I agree.
So you part of the thing you were saying about a bit earlier. So you're saying about this system center that you kind of software center. So what does that do, sorry?
No, that's perfectly all right. So what we software center is a collaboration between 16 companies and 5 universities. We have companies like Ericsson, Saab, Volvo Cars, Volvo Trucks, Scania, but also international companies like Grundfos, Bosch, and Siemens, and others. And we have 5 universities. The idea behind the center is to accelerate the digital transformation of the European software-intensive industry.
Okay.
We are purely partner funded. We just got some of our first public money, but we so far basically been fully funded by the companies. And that's also why I can use a model where I basically follow what I call the golden rule. The golden rule is he or she with the gold rules. Since the companies are supporting us, the companies get to decide what we spend those funds on, and which projects get funding and which projects do not get funding. And that has actually worked surprisingly well. We do activities around continuous integration, continuous test, continuous delivery, so the whole DevOps chain, work around architecture, technical debt management, APIs, etc. We do work around metrics. How do you instrument your whole development chain? We do work around customer data.
How do you avoid technical debt and all that kind of malarkey?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff. We do look into customer data and ecosystems. So all the companies that we work with are getting lots and lots and lots of data back from the field. How do you make actually use of that data? And then the last theme is what we call AI engineering, because many people, when they talk about AI, they think that training and a machine learning model is the hard part. But in almost all deployments, it is getting a high quality data pipeline, getting good quality data for training, instrumenting and monitoring your machine learning model as it is deployed, triggering automatic retraining, triggering alarms, keeping track and logging all the things. Everything around the machine learning model is much more involved and much more difficult than the actual creation of the machine learning model itself. That's at least our experience with the companies that we work with.
So it's like what you call data ops and ML ops. Like how do you embed it into production? Is that right?
Exactly. And I mean, basically, we talk about the three digital technologies, software, data, and artificial intelligence. That's how we define it as the enablers for digitalization. And of course, for software, we have DevOps. For data, we have data ops. I mean, how do you work with that? And then for AI, machine learning, deep learning, it's ML ops or AI ops or whatever you want to call it. And all those three things have to come together in an integrated way of working that allows companies to actually deploy in a reliable, productive fashion. So we look
what you see, what the kind of cohort of companies you got involved there, they're quite diverse, aren't they? Because you've got automotive, you've got, I mean, my old employer, SAP in Baldorf, right?
Yeah.
I worked for them for a number of years. I was a customer of SAP and then joined SAP in the 90s. God bless them. And but then you've also got some of the industrial kind of like the large industrial heavyweights.
Yeah, so
like Bosch and Siemens, people like that.
Exactly. So what we have is all companies are basically what I would consider to be embedded systems companies or cyber-physical systems companies, whether it's automotive or it's defense or it's telecommunications or it's industry like Tetra Pak, milk package filling machines and those kinds of things. But all of these companies have mechanical parts, electronic parts, and software parts, which makes them really different from a company like Intuit that I used to work for, which is a pure software company, which limits the amount of dependencies that you have on other parts because you basically run on general purpose hardware.
Right.
And embedded systems companies or cyber physical systems companies have a number of different constraints that you don't find in the SaaS companies of this world.
Yeah. It's a lot more complex, isn't it? It's a lot more complex. There's a lot more moving parts.
Yeah. So, I mean, I always find my experience is that every company becomes complex because we basically run into the limits of human intellect. Yeah, I worked, for instance, several years ago with Booking.com, which from the outside looks extremely simple. I mean, a hotel room booking website, how hard can it be, right? But once you go in, it's incredibly complex because of the scale and the volume and all kinds of other things. So what I've noticed is that every company is complex, but they're complex in their own ways. And embedded systems companies have mechanics, electronics, and software. They typically have ownership issues in that it's not the company owning the products. I mean, Volvo doesn't own the trucks. It is the customers that own the trucks. Whereas if you go to a Booking or a Skyscanner or one of the other players, basically they own their own deployment. They often have regulatory constraints. I mean, we have some healthcare companies, we have automotive companies, you can't just do DevOps without solving the regulatory constraints part. So yes, there are complexities, but every company is complex, but these companies have a set of different complexities when compared to SaaS or other companies.
Yeah, I mean, it makes the SaaS companies, software companies, look a bit lightweight in comparison in the amount of depth that they have to do, and what their operating model is different, obviously, as well.
Yeah, but the fact is that many of the innovations that we've seen in the software space start off in the SaaS world, then come to the embedded systems world, and then move to the heavy-duty IT solutions of banks and insurance companies. At least that is my assessment, and we can discuss on whether that's correct or not. But if I look at Agile, DevOps, A/B testing, adoption of AI, many of those things start off in SaaS and then roll down the chain to other industries over time. That's at least how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, my experience working in banks and telcos in particular, and retailers to a certain extent as well, with my days at Tesco, is that some of the parts of the operating model they just they daren't touch. It's like unless it's a compliance and regulatory. So in the banks that I've worked, it's like 90% of the change plan was taken up by regulatory stuff, and I'm going, what about my stuff? It's how to improve the customer experience. Oh no. Don't do that.
That's it. Yes, and this is, and we can talk about that. The fact is that regulation actually protects incumbents. That's why I think fintech, for instance, is such an interesting space, because many fintech companies are trying to find much smarter and lightweight ways to deal with the regulatory constraints. But in general, what we see is, of course, that regulation is really, in many ways, a way to protect the incumbents and limit the competitive pressures from new entrants into an industry. Yes, it's very heavy duty, and yes, it's very expensive, and yes, it's a hassle. But it's also kind of a moat around the business. So there are different ways to looking at it.
High barriers to entry. Yeah.
Exactly.
So obviously you talked about one of the stuff that you're working on. I mean, is it worthwhile? I mean, I'm just thinking about some of the 2024 predictions that you were talking about. I know that you mentioned some of them already. One of the things I thought was quite interesting was, I suppose what I was going to ask you about was actually teams are truly going truly cross-functional. Is that because the late delivery of projects and overspend on projects? Is it actually the executive leadership is now saying you've got to have a more cohesive working environment between the business and technologists? Is that what you're seeing?
So what I see is that many of the companies that I work with have been adopting agile practices for a long time, but it was mostly at the level of software teams and maybe at the software R&D organization, but it didn't reach end to end all the way to the customer. So the customer still gets the yearly release. The teams are working in 2-week sprints. And what I see now with the increasing adoption of DevOps and other kinds of approaches is that companies are trying to go all the way out to customers and try to get fast feedback loops all the way around. But the moment you do that, you can't have R&D here and product management here and sales here and customer support there. No, then all those functions need to come together, because the cycle speed is so quick that you can't run the business by handovers between different functions. You need truly cross-functional teams where R&D, product management, customer support are, at least those functions are integrated, and probably sales will have to have a big connection to those teams as well in order to make sure that we can make things happen. And that's what I see. If you really want to do true DevOps, you can't have handovers between different functions anymore, because the speed will simply not be there.
Yeah, I mean, I was smiling there because it reminds me of a telco that I worked for, a mobile network operator. Like a major operator that's operating in multiple countries. We had this thing called water scrumfall.
Yes.
Yeah. So the analogy would be with the budgets, right? How do you apply Agile? So the dev team for e-commerce was Agile, yeah. But the thing is, the budget process, you did a business case, you got the budget allocated, but then the finance team was so un-Agile in this case that they took them so long to release the funds that the tech team then had to basically was starting late, so they were under pressure. And then what happened was when they built the actual new application, new features, etc., they wanted to get into production, because they were so obsessed about compliance and customer experience and stuff like that. It took them like 16 weeks to get stuff into production. So they had this like really slow funding process, then a really fast development cycle, and then like a really slow deployment. It was just crazy.
Exactly. And that's what I see everywhere. And what I now see is that almost all companies that I work with want to get to some form of DevOps. I mean, I think you know that Ericsson for the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years, all customers that want it get new software every 2 to 4 weeks. And that means that you have to have your end-to-end value delivery cycle working in a highly automated, highly integrated, cross-functional way of operating, because otherwise you can't do it. Yeah, then you're too slow. Then you get into this water scrum fall way of working.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is unfortunate.
I mean, one of the other ones I was going to ask you about was federated learning.
Yeah.
Is that what's the thinking behind that?
So, for those of I don't know who in your audience knows the term federated learning, but the idea basically is I have multiple systems that are training a model locally and then exchange model data in order to jointly become better. So they learn from each other's learnings. That's basically it.
Right.
The interesting thing is the approach that we've taken to AI and to machine learning in general is triggered by the SaaS companies. And the SaaS companies have their servers. They have all their data centralized from day one because they have their data centers. And therefore, it's for them, it's the logical approach to store all data centrally, to train the model centrally, and then to distribute the model basically to the server that is running next to the place where I did the training. But in the embedded systems world, we work in a very different context. We have hundreds, thousands, if not millions of devices out in the field. All those devices are generating data. And if I want to collect all the data from all those devices to a central location, do centralized training, and then deploy models again, what we see is that many companies are limiting the use cases that they are actually pursuing because of cost and lack of connectivity and lack of storage capability and other things like that. So what I believe that the embedded systems world needs is to look much more serious at federated learning, where every device gets a little bit of headroom in its electronics so that it can do some level of local training. Instead of pushing all the data to the cloud or to peers, you're basically sharing model data, which is typically orders of magnitude smaller. So you exchange model data, and then all the devices can basically learn jointly in a network without having to use a centralized data storage approach. So for me, that makes a lot of sense. And I am starting to see that several companies are starting to explore whether federated learning is something that they can actually use, and for initially the least safety critical or the least critical use cases, but at least the companies are starting to look into that. And I'm hoping that during this year, we're going to see a lot more of that federated learning. Yeah, but what I believe is if you're an embedded systems company, you shouldn't blindly copy what the SaaS companies have done. You have to think about, go back to first principles and figure out, in my context, what is the best way of realizing and following these first principles to them?
I mean, is it really distributed learning, or is it what is the reason why you got centralized versus distributed?
Yes.
Is it federated because you're saying that they talk to each other in the kind of out as like nodes in a network, effectively?
Exactly. And then there are different approaches to federated learning. You can have a centralized model processor. So all the devices send their model updates to a centralized node, which then distributes updated models. You can even have peer-to-peer model exchanges. So the updates basically spread through the system like what you see on Skype. There are different architectures, but the idea is you do not bring all the data to a central location to do the training there. I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, because effectively you spend all your time moving the data to then process it centrally, to then actually make a decision and then blow it back out into all the nodes, which just seems ridiculous. Okay.
So that's what I believe. For many use cases, this is a better approach in companies that build embedded systems. There's also a privacy aspect. I mean, one of the companies we work with builds military solutions for several governments. These governments don't want to share data with each other because data typically contains military secrets.
Right.
However, they are willing to entertain the thought of sharing model data with each other, so that when multiple countries would share the models rather than the data, they would maintain their secrecy, but they would still get better models because these models are then trained on more data than what each individual country could pursue by itself.
Right,
so
right.
it's not just a practical, there's even also
Yeah,
security.
it's like sharing value. Yeah. The final one I was going to ask you about, which is quite interesting, was organizations will lean out.
Yeah.
Will lean out management layers. That's kind of like a deforestation of organizations, I presume.
So one of the big things that I'm looking into right now, I'm not sure if you know the concept of a North Star metric, where you basically have a company that organizes itself around one or a very small number of KPIs. If the way we work with that is we have one or a few top-level KPIs, and then we build a hierarchy of values under that, where different teams contribute to different KPIs below that, and we know that these lower-level KPIs contribute positively with some kind of multiplier to the higher-level KPI. If you have a well-functioning, what we call value model, a hierarchical model of top-level values, lower-level values, you don't have to have the middle management alignment problem where you basically say, you should work on this, you should work on that, you should work on that. Instead, what you do is you tell every team, this is your KPI or set of KPIs to improve. You can't break or deteriorate these other KPIs. These are guardrails. You got full autonomy to execute as you want, as long as you move the needle and you don't break anything anywhere else. And then we're good.
Right.
And that requires a much lower level of middle level managers, I believe, than what we've seen in the past. Because earlier we had situations where we had to take decisions and then we would have to wait 1, 2, or 3 years before we would know if it was the right decision or not. And then you had very high coordination costs. And what I believe is by using value models and outcome-based approaches for teams, you can significantly lower coordination costs, and through that, thin out management layers in the same way. I mean, you were part of the Agile transformation like I was, but I mean, every organization that adopted Agile got rid of a whole bunch of different manager types, first level and second level managers, because the teams had much more autonomy to operate independently. When you move to outcomes and you give teams outcome metrics instead of build me this backlog, instead of that, you say improve these KPIs, then the teams, especially if they're multifunctional or cross-functional, can then jointly, locally figure out how to actually execute and what to focus their energy and time on. That's what I believe. Now, maybe it's wishful thinking. Someone on LinkedIn had a nice prediction, but I think it's more wishful thinking or wishes than predictions. But we're not going to go there right now.
No, I think it's a great one. I think it's well overdue. I mean, you know, I did a speech last year and about the impact of Gen AI, and not only about the retransformation of different roles, but also it actually is an opportunity to reshape the organisation and review the jobs to be done. Because unfortunately, people come into a role and they have a certain tenure, and then they move on to the next role. And what transformation do they actually ever do, or get the opportunity to do in their tenure? But then, with these capabilities being so powerful, it can really make you rethink the organisation structure.
Yes.
And then the organisation that doesn't grab the nettle and go after that, then I think they're missing out.
Yeah. Can I share? I mean, one of the models that I use often in this context, which goes back to the 90s, before you were born, Andrew, is the BAPO model.
You're very polite.
The BAPO model, which basically says that business and business strategy should drive architecture and technology choices. Architecture and technology choices should drive process, ways of working, and tools. And process, ways of working, and tools should drive organizational structure. I mean, team structure, accountability, etc., etc. Most organizations that I work with claim their BAPO, but in practice they're OPEP. Yeah, OPEP meaning I have an existing organization. Because that existing organization, I have a set of processes and ways of working, because some people are close, some people are far away. So that set of processes and ways of working leads to an accidental architecture. And that accidental architecture gives me a very limited set of business strategy options. And that's where many companies go wrong, that they do not fully align the B, the A, the P, and the O, but they start from the existing O. And the problem is that if you start from there, you're already dead in the water. Then nothing will happen.
Yeah, but not to be controversial in this episode, but I will be. Or try to be. How many people have we seen who, equate their position in the company based on budget and headcount as being power and influence, right? So, yes. And also, I won't say who that person was, but one person that I worked with before who said they'd moved from a financial services environment to a telco environment, mobile telco environment, and they said that they were concerned that the velocity and the clock speed of that industry was could affect their career. Yeah,
they would be considered obsolete too early in their lives, basically. Is that what you're trying to say? Yes.
Yeah, because in banking it's a certain clock speed, and then obviously in telco it's another clock speed.
It's much faster.
Et cetera. So it was so yeah, I've been in large corporates like you have, and
yes.
Well, I suppose you know, it's we're not going to fix it on this episode, but yeah, it's an interesting. I think this is where actually some of the learnings from working in startups actually could help. It could help large organizations. So there's a I don't know if you've read the book or you know the guys, the Strategizer guys. So Alexander Osterwald and Tendaya Vicky. Yeah. So Tendaya Vicky came on the show a few years ago, and he'd written a brilliant book called Pirates in the Navy. So basically, the innovation team in a corporate, because the Navy's like, stand by your beds, and then the pirates are there going, oh no, let's break all the rules and everything like that. So it's a very good book actually. So yeah, it's I think there's many organizations out there need a few more pirates.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is the constant challenge in many of the companies I work with. On the one hand, many of the organizations, especially high-level management, wants more innovation. They have two approaches. Either you put innovation outside of the existing organization, and you have basically a small company of pirates that are all trying to do crazy things and are trying to come up with beautiful ideas, and they find a lot of interesting ideas, but they are typically unable to scale them because pirates are not very good at scaling and systematizing and growing businesses.
Yeah.
The other alternative is that you put it inside the existing organization. And then you run into exactly the problem that you just described earlier. Something interesting and valuable comes along that customers really want and could be a great new business for companies, but it doesn't align with the career goals of the people that are in decision roles. And that things get killed. And this is, I think, one of the things that many companies have not yet figured out. How do you keep innovations alive long enough to have them show that they have potential? But once you have shown that they have potential, how do you place them in a context where they can actually grow, scale, and become a significant new business for the company? That is, I think, one of the hardest things to do in a large organization. And I mean, if I knew how to solve that, I wouldn't be sitting here or standing here being a professor at the university. I would be a very well-paid consultant in many large companies.
No, but you'd still be coming on the G&T Sessions podcast.
But I would still be on your podcast. That's absolutely.
It's interesting. So there's a I don't know if you know the guy. He's called Turner as well, and he's written a book. I don't know if you've heard of it. Be Less Zombie.
Be Less Zombie. No, that doesn't ring any bells.
It's a really good guy. He's been on my show as well. He's called Elvin Turner. No relation. But he basically he said that he gets workshops together, and he basically puts people in a line, so they have to organize themselves in a line about how innovative they are and these different measures of how innovative they are. And he's written a book called Be Less Zombie, because basically the zombie companies versus the kind of like you could call it the unicorns. Companies. The unicorns at one end and the zombies at the other end.
Yeah.
They kind of rate their own company basically. But yeah, it's quite an interesting exercise that you go through. No, it's fascinating. I mean, great topics. I mean, really, really valuable topics, and it looks like you're working in some very interesting, like dimensions. You made your role, what you do today, based on your experience, is like it's got some really interesting facets to it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we do with guests as well, I suppose, it's we don't follow the complete formula for every question, but one of the questions I wouldn't mind asking you is, based on your kind of trajectory and your timeline so far, if you were going to share some pearls of wisdom, of what would be some pearls of wisdom to share to people who were maybe on their path and they wanted to learn from Mr. Jan Bosch about what his perspective was as things to think about as you go along your journey. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. And I didn't prepare this, so now I have to go out on a limb. I'm not sure if you saw the Steve Jobs 2005 Stanford commencement speech, where he ended with "Stay hungry, stay foolish, stay hungry." And what he talked about is if you feel you haven't found what you're looking for, keep looking.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. It took me a long time, Andrew, to figure out what my purpose in my professional life was. And initially, and this is, I think, typical for many especially young men, it's very much about me. I want to make money. I want to run a large organization. I want to have a big job title. I want to have a big car. I want to have whatever it is, right? And what I realized is that, we've all been there. So, and I fell into that trap very hard as well. And I realized the more success I had on the industry side, it still did not match who I truly needed or wanted to be. So I basically let go of a Silicon Valley vice president role. I could have been CTO somewhere. I could have been CEO somewhere if I had wanted that part in my life. And what I now realize is what I really enjoy is taking on really complex, messy situations where many organizations are struggling with, creating structure, and using that to help companies accelerate their adoption of new technologies. Because, I believe that that's what I can best do, especially around digital technologies, to put a dent in the universe, as the Americans try to call it, or at least do something that makes my life worthwhile and valuable. And that's why, if you went back far enough in my blog, I wrote a 15 rules or how to be the protagonist of your life, 15 rules. And number 2 is have a purpose. So I think that everyone who is not really clear on why they get out of bed in the morning should spend some significant time on clarifying their purpose for themselves at this point in yes. I think
that's currently in my bag. It's currently in my bag that I walk around with.
I may have to see if I can find an EPUB of that book, because it seems like something that I might have.
Look at this. Look at this one. Look.
No alcohol. I like it.
There's quite interesting.
So if you ask me, one of the things that I've really focused on is get clear on your purpose. Why are you walking around? That's the first biggest thing that I can advise to people.
But if you think about it, though, that's a great one. I think, but the thing is also the education system, for what it's worth, doesn't help you with that point at all. It just goes, you cross all these, tick cross, come out,
Yes, and this is, I see my sons fall into that trap actually at the moment. But you have to understand where schooling comes from. Chalmers University started as a vocational school in the 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. Why? because we needed loyal, obedient, and easy to control factory workers.
Taylorism.
That's where schooling started. And what we see is that a lot of schooling is still concerned with basically creating obedient factory workers, now called knowledge workers, and not people. You're not educated to explore who you want to be or what your purpose in life is or how you want to.
It's conform, basically, isn't it, to the model? Yeah,
exactly.
The blueprint.
And what I see is that the generation after us, the young people of today, for them, purpose is critically important. So any company that hasn't figured out their purpose is not going to connect with the Gen Zs and the millennials. And I mean, I'm happy about that. I think that society would be much better off if we have a much stronger purpose focus. And in general, I mean, you showed me the book. If I talk about startups, I mean, I dabble in startups as well. I believe very strongly in founder-led, purpose-driven startups. Those for me are the most interesting. And because if you can't explain to your people why what they're spending their life energy on matters, it's not the paycheck.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not enough anymore, in my experience.
Yeah, because there's this war for talent and people just walk. Yeah, if you don't, you got to build a multifaceted relationship with that individual.
Exactly, and I think that's critically important. So that's the biggest one. I have a whole bunch of other rules that I will not bother you with, unless you want me to. But I mean, I have 15 rules that I think are important that I try to follow where I can.
I was just looking for my my Netflix book. You know what is it? The no rules or something. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
You know, the guy that the CEO of Netflix wrote.
Yeah, I met him when I worked for Intuit. Interestingly enough, that was.
Is it Reed Hastings? Is that what he's called? Reed Hastings? Is that right?
Reed Hastings. Yes, that's the. Yeah.
Oh, so, that's it. The no rules. That's what they call it, isn't it? The no rules. I think they call it. Yeah. Cool. Well, all I can say is, I mean, obviously, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Andrew.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's great. I mean, you're working on so many interesting things, and you've obviously got a really interesting background. I think you've dropped some, very big value bombs. People, listen to this episode, they'll learn something, and they'll, hopefully take it away and embrace it. I suppose the question for me, the final question for me was, if you want to know more about yourself and understand more about the stuff you're working on, what's the best place to find that? How do we find the Jan Bosch world?
Yeah, so the Jan Bosch world, go to janbosch.com and you'll find my website. Anyone who's interested and wants to learn a little bit more can reach out to me at jan@janbosch.com. If people want to know about Software Center, it is software-center.se. That's one of the other places that I spent a lot of time on. But I think that in general, if you are interested, read my blog a little bit about some of my thinking. I often go through series where I write about things. There's a little bit about me on YouTube. But by and large, I basically try to keep busy and not spend too much time marketing my stuff, but rather doing actual real work and real stuff. But Andrew, I wanted to thank you for taking the time and drawing out whatever value that I was maybe able to provide, because it was because of your question. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No problem at all. No problem. No, I've done over 100 episodes now, so I'm kind of working out how to do it, but still learning every day.
You're very experienced. That's for sure.
Well, I'm not exactly Joe Rogan, but I don't know if anybody else wants to be Joe Rogan. Anyway, but he's a great guy. The only thing I was going to say, because I think something you mentioned the other week actually was something coming up in the summer. I think, or is it before the summer? Something you're doing up in Sweden, which is about the digital. Is it digital leadership or something?
We have a digital product management week coming up. So for everyone who is related or in any way involved in product management activities, and I describe it as, traditional R&D is about how are we going to build what it says in the spec. But what I now see is that it's becoming increasingly important. We do not only talk about how to build it, but also what should we build and why should we build it. And we believe that with digitalization and everything going cross-functional and having very fast feedback loops, that has huge implications on how we work with product management. And in the week of June 10, we're going to have a whole week here in Gothenburg that everyone is welcome. It's going to be free for participants, unless you register and do not show up. Then we charge a show fee. But we will have a summit for professionals. We will have an academic conference. We will have startup events. So we'll have lots of different things, all for people that are active on product management tasks. And this is not just people that have a product management title. I think that many engineers, many architects, and many others are actually having or taking on product management responsibilities. And this is going to be a very relevant week for them as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to have you there, Andrew.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say there won't be any snow then, will there? There'll be quite nice and summery then, won't it, in June?
It's and June in Sweden is the best time to be there. The most sun, the least rain, and the nicest temperatures.
All I can remember though of Gothenburg, so I did obviously when I was at Tesco, I used to source handsets from Nokia when they were in their heyday, and I used to go to Espoo all the time in Finland to see them, bless them, and it was always snowing in Sweden, in Finland. No, Finland and Gothenburg. When I landed in Gothenburg, it was also, like when you land in a blizzard, right?
Yes.
And then they have to de-ice the plane like 10 times before you actually take off.
Yes.
That was that's the last time I was in Gothenburg. But always in Finland, it was just like, it's like horrendous weather. And then obviously in the hotel rooms, they have the happy light, yeah?
Yeah.
Like the light that you're supposed to look in the morning.
I still have one. So,
She's stolen it from a Finnish hotel and took it back to Sweden.
Exactly. No, it's I mean, of course the Nordics have some disadvantages as well, especially from a climate and winter light perspective. But it's a very well organized society, and I've really enjoyed living here in the Nordics. So I can really recommend it for everyone who's considering it. You can stand a little bit of snow and a little bit of darkness. I think there are a few better places in the world to live than here in Sweden.
Cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. That's been Jan Bosch.
Andrew. I appreciate it.
Jan Bosch, innovator, executive, and professor. In that order, I think it's good. I think you explained it as well, which is even better.
Good.
And that was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. Thank you very much for today, and see you soon.